I had the opportunity to listen to our next speaker at an event, and the individual aside of me said, "She certainly speaks with passion and the fire in her belly." I know you're going to enjoy our next speaker. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce to you the Honorary State President of the Children of the American Revolution, Miss Catherine Turner.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I was invited to speak today in order to give a young person's perspective regarding the legacy of the Korean War. First, let me say that I am not a historian. Even after reading about the war and speaking with some veterans, my knowledge of the events is limited. I am, unfortunately, in the company of a vast majority of Americans on this subject. However, after doing some reading about the war, I began to wonder if the reason this conflict is so neglected and forgotten is because, as large and important as it was, it gets lost in the glare of other events. And, quite frankly, with all the political and diplomatic chaos at the time, it's almost impossible to condense the reasons for the conflict into an easily understood and comprehensible nugget. The events leading up to this police action were mired in the chaos of post-World War II politics and diplomacy. Winning World War II was far more straightforward than winning the peace. The world was torn up by the aftershocks of World War II, with countries trying to jockey for position in a world that was suddenly very different from the one that existed before the war. Before World War II, we could see that the Axis powers were trying to carve out empires. Even though we were reluctant to get involved, once Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and Germany declared war on us, we knew what needed to be done, and we were willing to pay the price for freedom. When the Korean War began, the wounds of World War II were still healing. Few people understood communism or socialism or why these philosophies were and are a threat to the United States. Not only did the average American not understand the political and diplomatic ramifications, but where the heck is Korea? Millions just died during World War II. Why do we care who controls a relatively small chunk of land that seemingly means nothing to us? With the memory of Adolf Hitler and the policy of appeasement that was employed as he started his attacks on Europe, President Harry Truman said, "If we let Korea down, the Soviets will keep right on going and swallow up one place after another." Given what we know now, that assessment was almost certainly correct. Thus, Korea was going to be where East and West would test their resolve and probe the adversary for weakness. The battle raged back and forth and eventually stagnated, with thousands of deaths occurring for land that seesawed back and forth. General MacArthur argued for escalation, or total war, and stated that anything less would constitute appeasement of the communists and embolden them to attempt the same type of takeover in Europe. However, what we are learning on the ground was that the Soviets and Chinese were extremely formidable enemies. Even if our technology was superior to the Soviets, which in some cases could be debated, theirs was comparable and, in the hands of their own forces, would prove to be extremely deadly. The Chinese were far inferior technologically, but they had huge numbers that could literally overwhelm us. The concept of total war, especially a war that would cost millions, perhaps billions, their lives and almost certainly lead us to the use of nuclear weapons, was even more unthinkable. Now we know that the Soviets and Chinese are arriving at a similar conclusion. All-out war with the United States would make the carnage of World War II seem like nothing. While they didn't trust the West, they weren't prepared to commit millions of people to die in a war that could so devastate the earth as to render it unrecognizable and potentially unlivable. Instead, we settle into the Cold War, continually probing the Soviets for information and weakness, continually trying to improve our strength and position, and maintaining the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. It took about 40 years from the start of the Korean War, but the failures of the Soviet system were exposed, and it succumbed to the economic and political pressures with which it was unable to cope. At the same time, China is undergoing political changes, moving, albeit slowly, toward a freer society. I think the Korean conflict must be remembered as the opening battle of the Cold War. The sacrifices made at Pusan, Ikcheon, Chosin, Bloody Ridge, Heartbreak Ridge, Old Baldy, Pork Chop Hill, and in countless other battles and skirmishes proved to the world that the United States could and would stand up to communist aggression. Decisions made and actions taken during the forgotten war would set the stage for the next 50 years and beyond. The brave veterans of Korea checked the advancement of communism. They let the world know that we would always rise to defend liberty, even if it was in some obscure corner of the world. Anyone that threatened her would pay a price for their imperial hubris. After thousands of casualties, a ceasefire was agreed upon on July 27, 1953. In hindsight, the fighting probably ended the only way it could have without starting World War III. People tend to ignore that which they do not understand. The events and circumstances surrounding the Korean War are about as confusing and convoluted as it gets. But we must remember that our Korean veterans rendered courageous and invaluable service to the cause of liberty. Their sacrifice and service is equal to that of any American patriot. They answered our nation's call and took up the banner of freedom. Their legacy is one of unfaltering service to America, steadfast commitment to the principles of freedom and liberty, and proud yet unpretentious honor. The status of the ceasefire continues to be problematic. It certainly seems to illustrate that there are threats to freedom that can't be easily reasoned with and cannot be ignored either. With the uneasy peace in Korea, we have faith that today's service personnel are ready and able to protect the light of freedom just as their fathers and grandfathers did. To close, I'll borrow from President Ronald Reagan, who gave a moving speech while standing at Pointe du Hoc on the 40th anniversary of the D-Day invasion. Although his remarks were targeted to the men who stormed the beaches to liberate Europe during World War II, with the slightest editing, they are just as appropriate for all those brave souls who came together and sacrificed for freedom thousands of miles from home on the Korean Peninsula. Particularly today, it is good and fitting to renew our commitment to each other, to our freedom, and to the alliance that protects it. We are bound today by the same loyalties, traditions, and beliefs. We are bound by reality. The strength of America's allies is vital to the United States, and the American security guarantee is essential to the continued freedom of democracies. We were with you then, we are with you now. Your hopes are our hopes, and your destiny is our destiny. Here in this place, let us make a vow to our dead. Let us show them by our actions that we understand what they died for. Let our actions say to them the words for which Matthew Ridgway listened: I will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Strengthened by their courage, heartened by their valor, and borne by their memory, let us continue to stand for the ideals for which they lived and died. Thank you to all the men and women whose service and sacrifice have provided the many opportunities afforded to me as an American. God bless you, and God bless America.
Thank you, Ms. Turner.